Hello with another iteration of the CM Kozeman special Q&A session. Yes, everyone, let's enter full screen right here. Yes, as you might probably know, every now and then I hold this answering your questions sessions. Now these happen in two ways. One, they happen with live streams, which are kind of random and unpredictable, and the answers I give there are kind of like off the cuff and like short and brief. But then there are these videos where the preferred chosen people, the Illuminati, the Kozemanati, basically everyone who donates to me on Patreon, can ask questions of their own, unless they're directly related to the plots of my upcoming books, such as All Tomorrows. In these videos, I answer them fully, clearly, how should I say, in detail, and as you're about to see with this fantastic new video, with images and lots of accessory stuff. All you need to do if you want to ask me questions is to go on patreon.com. The link is in the video description and the Patreon comment. There's actually a special post on Patreon for the next round now, because we've finished the previous round with this video. Basically, go there, donate to me for as little as $1 a month, and then you can ask me anything. There's no limit to how many questions you might ask. And I actually encourage questions about real life, more like real detailed life questions. And I will answer everything to the best of my ability. So let's go. My good friend Jakub Bobrovics asks, he's actually a really good spec Evo artist too. He says, there's something wrong with the way we reconstruct dinosaurs. With All Yesterdays, which was the book I wrote and helped co-illustrate, we vanquished shrink-wrapped reconstructions, but Jakub says the current paradigm is to make everything look like a chunky monitor lizard. Even the excellent designs in Prehistoric Planet didn't feel quite real to me, too safe and smooth for the lack of a better word. I actually kinda agree with this. Jakub continues, I prefer my dinosaurs more bird-like with lumps and bristles and whiskers and beady eyes. I suspect if we went back in time and observed a living dinosaur, it would be so alien that we wouldn't recognize what we are seeing at first. I totally agree with this sentiment. Your paleo art perfectly captures that alien quality which I love. Well, thank you. Now the question comes, do you have any thoughts on what we could still be getting wrong about dinosaur reconstructions? What do you think about when you reconstruct a dinosaur? Well, my friend, thank you for this amazing question. What can I say? I did notice that point about Prehistoric Planet 2, which was a very, very nice and beautifully made dinosaur documentary. I think it's like the dinosaur documentary for the next 2 decades at least. But then I have some also critiques. These are not like savage critiques, I think they did a great show there. Many people who worked in the show are my close friends, so this is not to be too nitpicky, but there is a certain thingness about animals. Whether you're looking at a flamingo or any other bird, they have a sense of being which we can only tell by looking at the creatures directly. And in Prehistoric Planet, perhaps because of production timeline limitations, they kind of like, it's clear to see that they tackled a lot of related species, but they made them too similar. Like, there's a raptor with a red pouch, there's a raptor with a slightly grayish color, but if you look actually at birds, they're all like wild. And another gripe I had was with the pterosaurs, which were excellently animated, don't get me wrong, but if you look at one of those Titanic Asdar hit pterosaurs, like the one you see here, there's like too much of an effort to make the hair look visible in places like this. And okay, yes, these things had like lots of muscle and meat on their bones, but if you look at flamingos, you can also have like very thin, almost like comical necks without the thing looking like a big muppet, for the lack of a better word. So when I illustrate pterosaurs, I actually try to make this look visible. Also, if you look at other details like any sort of predatory or scavenging bird, they got lots of grotesque details. They don't need to be shiny and like bright and colorful, but there's a lot of lumps, hairs, little unknown weird things. And to make it all even more confounding, birds combine this kind of fleshy, built up, hairy, feathery look with something like raw bone to the beak in many instances. Now, we don't know if dinosaurs did this. There are big debates still going on whether, perhaps you heard them, on whether Tyrannosaurus had lips or something. I used to be on like Camp Fleshy, where I would say basically these things are like big chunky monitor lizards and they had like fleshy but immovable lips. But then again, you don't know. But then again, maybe this is an artifact we are seeing in birds mostly because, well, birds have beaks, and this might be a special situation with beaks. And if we actually went back at non-bird dinosaurs, maybe they did have lips like monitor lizards, but I really don't know. The more I study this, the more moot the picture becomes. So within reason, almost anything goes. But one slight critique with Prehistoric Planet was they tried to make the models look very accurate, but also they kind of like missed on the thingness that different species may have had. Like they kind of look, for the lack of a better word, slightly generic. Although there are some really awesome models like the earth-shaking sauropod that kind of had also the thingness about them too. Certainly, for example, Mononicus, if you watch Prehistoric Planet and look at the cute one-fingered wood-boring insect-eating dinosaur, that was a really cute thing, and they really nailed down the thingness there. But in certain ways, I also think that the show could have used more contrast. Like if you look at this is a present-day species of peasant, and yes, it's kind of drab and the colors are natural, but also look how bright and vibrant and its own thing this creature is. And maybe in the next episodes or in the next seasons, there could be more of this in Prehistoric Planet. Even if you look at quote-unquote drab birds who have to be kind of camouflaged because they can't fly, these for example are the hatchlings of a cassowary. You notice that there's something really weird going on with their skulls. It's not shrink wrapped, but it's not like this either. This is a screenshot from Prehistoric Planet depicting Mazyakosaurus, and yes, this is a great model, and don't get me wrong, the show is awesome, but if you look at the throat, they put all the flesh there, but if you look at the throat here, the throat is actually closer to the bone contours, but there is a lot of flesh and hair and shit going on, but it's not like this gorby flesh, you know what I mean? It's kind of leaner in a way. Also, it's got external ears. You can't see external ears here, but also maybe with these animals, like the nose and the nostrils and the lips, they may not have been as fleshy, but kind of like weirdly flanged looking, but also mixed with hair and stuff. But once again, this could be an artifact of the beaks, and we just don't know. Don't get me wrong, please. My friends worked on this show. I'm not tearing down your show. I'm just saying, like, maybe another way to look at this could be possible. Also, the eyes kind of look animatronic-y, whereas birds have these like weird, like soulless eyes that, strangely enough, have more character in them. Look at the flamingo's eyes here, for example. Whoop! What's he thinking? Anyways, once again, I can't stress this enough. I'm not in any ways like trying to like be smart about this. This was a great show, and I watched it with tears in my eyes, and great show, and kudos to everyone who worked on it. When I draw dinosaurs, and certainly I'm a less talented paleo artist than many people out there, including many people who worked on Prehistoric Planet. When I draw dinosaurs though, I try to make them have this thingness. For example, this is Eotyrannus, one of the early Tyrannosaur-like dinosaurs. And when I was drawing this thing, I kind of like played the same game, like maybe bits of the skull were naked without seeing every hole on the skull itself. and it was kind of buried in this like light svelte flesh. And yes, this thing probably was camouflaged, so if it lived in a forest, it probably had this greenish brown color. But this didn't mean it could not have its own patterns and its kind of like own thingness too. This is what I try to do when I'm drawing dinosaurs, or heck, even, oh god damn it, what's going on? Wait, we got a problem here. Yes, even when I'm drawing herbivorous dinosaurs, I try to make them look bulky, but also like remembering their lineage as like crocodile and bird adjacent creatures. So when I draw like this thing, which is Lambiosaurus, I put a lot of flesh on the beak, on the crest. I think it was like covered with a heckin' load of flesh and wattles and shit. I also connect the S-shaped neck with a fold of flesh. But then again, because this was a gigantic animal, I also tried to make it without feathers. Maybe they probably did have feathers when they were juveniles, but that doesn't matter. To my credit, I gave these guys hoof-like pads before they discovered actual hooves on a related species. So ding ding, plus 1 point for Daddy Kozman. And also, what am I? I'm really such a boomer with these controls. Okay. Also with the cheeks, I try to... These things have a kind of cheek space, but I reconstruct them with basically something like a huge duck beak with overhanging folds, but without cheeks as you would see on a mammal, or in some cases they reconstruct them with almost like a sock puppet appearance and only the beak is peeping out of this like sock of flesh, but I don't know how that would work in real life. Even with pterosaurs, this is the same pterosaur you saw here, this kind of guy. Like, I don't know why they would make the crest so blocky and angular, whereas this is a gigantic aerodynamic creature. So I kind of like either shave it down or streamline it. I gave this guy a kind of like a pouch that it might use to make sounds or make displays. I slimmed down the neck as much as I could, and I did not have any of these like hair appearance thing, because this thing was wrapped in a shell of contour hugging hair or feathers or whatever this thing had. Now, if this is like as tall as a giraffe, you would never see hair from that distance. So these things, I don't know, these are like, so this is a heritage that pterosaur artist Mark Witten included in the folklore of paleo art. It looks hairy and okay, yes. But if you look at a 12-meter tall animal from like 50 meters away, you would not see hair. Even in shaggy animals, you would not see any hair like this. So I don't know why this is going on. In my humble opinion, and yes, there are many paleo artists who are technically more talented than me. In my humble opinion, though, I try to make it more like contour hugging without looking like a living skeleton. And I also included a kind of early water bird for reference. So this could be some gigantic animal that could like eat up giant herons the same way a giant heron would eat up pigeons in a park. So there. Another question from Jakub Bobrovics. A speculative evolution question. Remember, all these questions now get answers with full illustrations, pictures. So now it's your chance. Just go to Patreon and support me, and we'll see where it goes. The link is below. Imagine an alternate Earth where insects become the dominant large land animals during the Carboniferous. What sort of creatures and ecosystems could you imagine in this lifetime? I imagine lots of giant bugs, but there's a caveat with insect development. In the Carboniferous, there were really a lot of giant insects, including the famous Meganevra, which was not quite like a dragonfly. Everyone draws it like a giant dragonfly. But if you look at it, it looked more like a gigantic lacewing. It did not have the huge eyes, but it had this like weird, elongated, almost mantis-like segment. You see this thing here, it was kind of lengthening. So if the evolution of these guys went on, maybe the tail would shorten, the front bit would be more mantis-y. I don't know. You could go to a lot of strange places. The problem is, all arthropods, including this spider here, they molt in order to grow. So how do you circumvent this? Even with things like this, this is a present-day dragonfly, by the way. only the final stage of the molt has the wings. So when you look at Megonevra, and it's like a crow-sized giant insect, it must have had lots of like crow-sized giant larvae swimming about in rivers and maybe occupying the same ecological niche as frogs and other amphibians. So the wings are dead. Technically, they don't grow. So the same thing with like rhinoceros beetles or stag beetles, they have these like huge larvae and they pupate and they go, but the final form you see with the biggest jaws, that doesn't grow. It grows as a larva, does the metamorphosis, and assumes its final form. Only in some groups of insects, like the true bugs, Hemiptera, you got like stages of growth. And then in the final version, the adult has wings if it uses them. And sometimes it just goes around like this. So if we were to have gigantic land insects, more of them would be similar to these guys, where they would be like boring, flightless, like grubby things. And only when it's time to like make babies, you see the winged and huge varieties. So if you're talking about charismatic land arthropods, there has to be a problem to the molting situation, and life always finds a way. But the way we know how arthropods grow these days, I don't know. Maybe they could have evolved a way to like retain parts of this thing in their body. So at least maybe the big abdomen would have something like a retained backbone under each layer, in between each layer of skin. So that would give it some support, and the legs would molt like this. But I don't know how that would go. So I predict maybe lots of less big animals, but so a lot less big animals, a lot less things the size of bisons and stuff, but maybe the maximum size of a dog. But those animals would be extremely diverse. They would have multiple ecological roles under one species. They would have like final flowering of winged varieties or horned and or hard carapace varieties. I don't know. The cool thing with insects is the larval stage, and they do some amazing shit there. And if they were the dominant animals and they took this larval stage business to even further extremes, and let me remind you, there are beetles that like basically somehow have figured out to have sex as wormy larvae, and if they ever develop into the adult stage is just purely sterile. It doesn't do anything. So they could go to a lot of weird places. So maybe the true vision of an insect world is a world with lots of grubby, wormy things and less like arthropod things. So there's my answer. Another question from Nicholas Konradsen. Hello, Mr. Cozy Man. Hope you are well. Hello, Nicholas. Let me take a sip of Daddy Cosman's water. Nicholas asks, do you have any soundscapes in your head when you look at your images? Or maybe do you have an imagined culture or folklore for your strange creatures? Now, here Nicholas is talking about my surreal paintings. And actually, no. And the best thing about my surreal paintings, which kind of look like, let's give you a little preview, which kind of look like this, things like this, or things like this, is that there's no logic in them. I do have lots of patterns that I repeat and I like to use, but I don't have any logic with them. I don't engage in any world building with them. For me, they're like a form of exorcism or even like art therapy. I don't know. I just like making them, and I just like making them look visually beautiful. That's it. I don't have a culture for them, but if you want to invent some around them, I'd be very happy. And also with music and soundscapes, I don't know. There's this really great musician named Steve Roach, whose music I really liked when looking at my own pictures. But no, there's no Cosman art theme song. But Nicholas Dan says he finds himself transfixed, and hopefully one day we'll hang one on my wall. Best wishes, your friend ever. Thank you, man. Thank you, Nico, so much. I will state it out for the whole world. If you have an album that's coming up, I'll happily let you use one of my images. I'll even show you sneak previews of things I haven't released yet. So, like, I'd be very happy to let you have a cover image for almost free. And also, if any of you want to purchase some of my original artwork, and if you support me on Patreon, you pay no delivery fees. So there's that. And compared to most high art you can find in galleries these days, my surreal art is slightly more affordable. Like a small painting the size of a dinner plate would be around like $150 or stuff like that. So, and it scales up from there. Like a big canvas is maybe 1,000. It's like that, you know. So if you got any money to spare, let me know. Okay, another question from Nicholas. Other than visual arts, how do you ever do other crafts like sculpting with clay, carving, sewing, stuff like that? I did experiment with clay sculpture, but I don't know. Like, I look at all the great sculptors I like, such as Brancusi or Moore or Giacometti, and these people like really put their heart and soul into their work, you know. They have these studios, they pour bronze, cast stuff, so I don't have access to that technical foundation. And I do sculpt weird things with my hands sometimes, but they're just, for me, they're like larks or like dalliances, you know. I would not call them like my finished work. I don't know. Sometimes I find like weird bits of driftwood and paint eyes and stuff on them, and they look really nice, but I don't know if they're like really sculpture, you know, the way real sculptors make them. And I can't sew for the life of me. So there. Thanks, Nicholas. Another question from Kyre Fiskrov, a long-time online friend. He's been with me for so long that he remembers this like kind of cringy artwork I had on DeviantArt. And one of them was something called Minimum Friends, he says. This was actually called Min Friends, which was like kind of my silly way of saying many friends, which featured white godly blobfish lording over a panoply of cartoon characters, including vulva-chested blobbies. Oh god, I remember this thing. A couple of black one-eyed mouse pillar things, a sloth, maybe your girlfriend at the time. No, it was just a random hot girl as a cartoon character. A few tadpole thingies. And of these deleted artworks, Kyre Fiskrov had this was his favorite. He says he even made the spore creatures of the things, and then it was deleted. For more than a decade, he's been wondering why. Well, could you be talking about this painting? Yes, that's this cringy painting that I had, and it was my way back in the day of making like cute, ironic, and cynical characters, a bit like Rick and Morty or like Super Jail, but with less gore, and it's meant to be edgy and weird and cute, but also like edgy because they have dicks and porn and stuff. But yes, I realized at one point that this is something I don't want my artwork ever to be. And I still make like silly things like this, but no one gets to see them. I mean, I don't want this like Kozeman cartoon universe, but because I'm already invested in making speculative evolution art and like surreal paintings, if I spread myself too thin, then I risk becoming like weird and like inconsequential. And yes, these are kind of memeable and cute, but yeah, in the whole art and creativity game, I aim for something more permanent and memorable and something more real. I mean, I could spend half an hour trying to make something that people will laugh at for a minute, or I could spend 2 hours trying to make something that will inspire people for a long time. Although in Kyre Fiskrov's credit, he's been inspired by this work for over a credit, so there you go. I can't bear to look at this. Like, the whole cringy, cynical angle aside, there are just so many awful things about line width, like what's going on here, why are these mountains, what's this thing, you know, it's just so badly made. What's going on with her legs, like what's with her hips, the foot, it's disgusting. Sorry, Pascagoula asks, are some of the plants in your surreal art inspired by the Voynich manuscript? Oh, you mean this? I like it so much that I can show pictures with my Q&A sessions this time. The Voynich manuscript, if you don't know, was this very weird alchemical manuscript written in an unknown language that nobody has successfully managed to decipher yet. Basically, it shows like weird images of plants and strange landscapes and formula and galaxies. It's even got some weird, like, almost, dare I say, kinky stuff with like women taking baths in like green goo and stuff like that. I don't know. My personal understanding is this was just an elaborate forgery created in the maybe 1500s in order to get some money out of rich patrons in Europe, because people were paying handsome fees for alchemical books and stuff at that time. And alchemy already was like throat deep in secret meaning, allegories, symbolism. So yeah. And yes, I have been really inspired by these things, but you know what I'm really inspired by when I'm making my surreal paintings? I'm inspired by the folk art in Anatolian mosques and still some houses and places like that. Until like 30 years ago, in Turkish villages, you could go to like actual mosques and they were all like extremely well painted with this lush flourishings of plants, beautiful decorations, awesome, very bold color choices, even like in some cases in more vernacular architecture. So not in mosques but in houses, they had drawings of birds and like weirdly stylized landscapes and all these like extremely beautiful shapes. Look at these things. Now these things really inspire me so much. I am not a nationalist, but it's clear to see that in Anatolia, in the present day, in rural Turkey, the tradition that began with ancient Greek and Roman art is still being practiced. These are actually not from Pompeii. You know, if I said, these are artworks from Pompeii, a lot of these classical like return types or these statuette types, they would eat them up. But no, these actually come from a village mosque in somewhere in Anatolia. And note how lovingly they rendered the palm leaves. People say these don't have perspective, but they actually have a universal perspective where you see everything at once. And these actually are from the ancient Etruscans. This is from Pompeii. This is from another Roman fresco that survived somewhere. And it's very clear to see that Anatolian vernacular art is just a version of ancient art, a still continuing vestige of this age-old tradition without human figures. They really are doing a great job here, and this is what inspires me more than the Voynich manuscript or anything in Occidental art or symbolism and stuff like that. I'm also inspired by other folk traditions such as these hece boards. So when somebody dies in rural Turkey, until they make the tombstones, they could cut a wooden board for him or her as a placeholder. And these wooden boards usually have these amazing shapes. And they have been documented in this book called Hece Tahtaları by Naci Eren. And you can still buy this book. It's pretty cheap. It was published in the 80s, but it's like running out fast. So like these shapes, I really, for more than a year, I studied them. And I'm really inspired by them. And likewise, I'm inspired by the art of contemporary vernacular Anatolia, the color choices, the knowing lack of perspective, the knowing lack of measurements. You know, the less you measure, the more spirit your art has. So I really, really love this stuff, and I think it's really underappreciated. So yeah, and I think that, you know, I'll also throw this out there. Present day Anatolia, including all these like villagers and quote unquote peasants, these like educated, stupid Turkish people like to look down upon, because in their minds they're backwards because they haven't been to college. Oh my God! Or they still live in the town. Oh, look at these rednecks. But actually, if you look at these people, They have a sense of understanding of art, virtues, and life that's so based and so deep, and it's gonna outlast all you college-educated snobs in the cities. So nice, so nice. Just look at it, and it's clear to see that this is a direct continuation of the tradition that began in ancient Greece and matured with the Etruscans and grew up in Rome. Turkey culturally is, I think, the chief inheritor of the antique world. Let me just leave that out there. And it just makes me proud. And yes, it's not to question the religion or the ethnicity of the people living in Turkey. I guess some of them are ethnic Turks from Central Asia, though don't do a DNA test. And yes, I have no questions about their religion, their faith. I'm not saying that everybody in Turkey is a descendant of converted Greeks or something, but they just, culture can be transmitted laterally. So they just absorbed the best bits that ancient culture had to offer, and they're just like having a great time carrying it into the present day. So based in that respect. Okay, more questions from Dale Durkin now. If a gamma ray burst sterilized the Earth now, how would life develop afterwards? Personally, I think plant and animal life, much of it would go extinct, opening a door for some very strange possibilities. Now, gamma ray bursts are these like incredible energy discharges people observe in the universe. There's just so much energy coming out of them, and nobody really knows what causes them. So there's food for thought. But there's so much energy that they can sterilize entire parts of galaxies. They're that strong. So if something like that hit the Earth, I don't know if anything could survive. Like, the energy burst could like blast the sun away. Who knows? If it was like a partial sterilization, let's say only some copepods in a pond in Siberia survived, then you could get like these weird tangents that are like copepod Earth, or basically a reset of evolution. Though like it took only like 200 million years for evolution to turn worms into fish, and only like 500 million years for evolution to turn worms into azdarchids. So when the realm of possibility is that big, drastic changes can occur. Another question: when you're taking a break from a project, revisiting it, feel like changing some things, how do you feel about this? He says, I often feel unsatisfied with earlier work. I feel this all the time. In fact, that's why I'm rewriting All Tomorrows and redoing Snayad. And I think in 30 years I'll even get to redo those, but I hope I'll still be around in 30 years or so. I think it shows that you're a good artist and you're never satisfied and you're never like calm with your achievements, and that's a good thing. I think that's the making of a great artist. And if you really want to redo a project, at least wait for 5 years. In 5 years, you'll still be disappointed, but will you still feel like doing that project again, or will you feel like moving on to new things? I think that's the question you should ask yourself. If you're still unsatisfied, but happy with letting it lay in the past, then move on, do another project. If you're still unsatisfied and you feel like it needs to be redone, then redo it. Another question: what do you think about the idea of ancient wisdom being held in our past? Is it possible that earlier people had different worldviews or thought processes, that they would interpret the world differently? In our worldview, so much is based on rationality and empirical thought that there could be other ways of looking at the physical world that our society misses today. I strongly agree with this sentiment, but I somehow slightly disagree with this sentiment. They often say that when the Europeans arrived to the New World, the American natives did not know what to make of their sailboats, so they had a kind of like mental zero divide. They could not even fathom what they were seeing. But come on, they saw it. I mean, they probably did not know what they were looking at, but they could also be puzzled rather than traumatized or, can't even. I think many people came from, in past societies, many people have actually a similar baseline to us, the basic concerns and wishes. Most people think in any given day, they think about just sex, to be honest. And if you look at graffiti from the Roman era, they're pretty similar. If you look at ancient Sumerian tablets, the way they're talking about commerce, they're very similar to contemporary business emails. So in the broad outlines, I think the ancient people kind of had the same concerns. The real differences you may have had in non farming societies. Now, if you look at hunter-gatherers living in forests, or in the aboriginal heartland of Australia, then you may have had some great drastic differences in processing things and just on the whole idea of what to do with life. You would still have the main motives the same though. What to do with life is to be safe, be warm, be happy, probably get it on with people, and live in a big society. You could have more differences, but I can't know what they are. Though the thing with rationality and consciously applying scientific or rational approaches to everything, that's a modern disease that only developed in the Western civilization. And I don't think even Romans had that. In fact, we know, I think, from historical times that Romans could build factories, but because they had this thing called, this little unfortunate thing called slavery, they were why have so many machines when people could do the same? And I think they differentiated, they kind of put a more hallowed emphasis. Even when these people were quote unquote slaves, they would still think it to be a better or more virtuous act to employ 500 potters rather than have a machine that would make that, because they had a more big picture view of things. So the purpose of life is not to make more productive pots more efficiently. It is actually to have the potters do their own thing. And they can't, somewhere along the way they let go of the efficiency game. And I think most of the world still is like that. In Turkey, people still think in the Roman way. They say, who's gonna think that much? O kadar kim düşünecek? Stuff like that. And to a contemporary person that kind of feels lazy or stuff, maybe it's not lazy. Maybe it's that human part of their spirit speaking out. Because after you do all the work more efficiently, what do you do? That's a question for the ages. In my personal view, I'm more inclined to agree with the Romans, though not with the slavery bit. But I think you should leave time, you should leave space in life. Societies should too, as well as people. Leave space for life, for laziness, for inefficiency. Just lay low sometimes. Though on the flip side, now that I'm thinking, inefficient, corrupt societies are also nightmarish to live under. So you have to factor this in, perhaps with the systematized way that Mediterranean people have siestas. Go look them up. I think Mediterranean people solved a lot of these issues that other societies have taken to nightmarish conclusions. But the big answer is, I don't know. Anyways, Thomas Strimple asks, hey man, hope you're doing well these days. Just a few questions I thought I would jot down. What was it like during the production of Tangent Realms? This is the documentary about my life and art that Kevin Schreck produced. What were parts of your artistic process and life experiences did you and Kevin Schreck feel important or you left out? Okay, so go look up Tangent Realms. It's this great documentary that my friend Kevin Shake filmed about my life. I now look back at it and I feel that certain bits are too melodramatic and like, I don't know, but it's a great documentary if you want to get to know me. I kind of come across as a sadder person and I don't like that now, but maybe I was a sadder person back then, who knows. The thing with Kevin Schreck is that I also have been a filmmaker and I still film all these like YouTube travel documentaries and stuff. And I know when I'm working with a filmmaker, the worst thing the subject can do is to say, hey man, what about we film this? Hey man, get me a shot of that. Hey man, get a shot of me doing this. It's just so annoying. So when I was working with Kevin, I actually did this really cool and unpredictable thing. I didn't interfere in any way. I just let him do his thing. If he wants to put something in, I let him. If he wanted to leave something out, I let him, because ultimately it was his documentary. And when we were filming this, he was actually paying out of his pocket for like basically dinner, transport costs. Like I ate like a king on his tab. So there's that. So when somebody's doing that, all I could do is just, it's a really like difficult to learn trick, by the way. When you're working with someone, just be like oxygen. Be present in the background. Do the things they want to do, but also maintain your official composure without guiding them, because they already are the filmmaker. You're not the filmmaker, you're the subject. I remember once we were like filming in some like weird forest or something, and I was like walking around and like painting rocks and stuff. And I remember saying like, if you're tired, we can just leave this segment out. And he was tired and we left that segment out. And I think it's really important to do this. Not just when you're working with documentaries of your life, but also when you're working with anybody. You have to trust people, delegate tasks to them, and they'll figure it out. And this is like a real lesson for everybody who's like, imagine you're working in an advertising agency. Now I do the same. I work in an advertising agency as a copywriter. And basically, there are people who do the graphics for the adverts that I write. And I have many opinions about how those graphics could look. But, you know, man, I'm not being paid enough to do that. I don't care. Let them do their own thing. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes they do a better job than... I mean, like, when it comes to work, you can't do everything all the time. Only in art do you get to be the supreme dictator. And okay, I do that with my artwork and in this channel. So while I go flip the laundry for 1 minute, I am dictating you all to donate to me on patreon.com. Okay, be right back, Cozumanites. Hope you're enjoying this new visual Q&A format. Okay. Another question from Thomas Strimpel. He says, a while ago you considered that a more realistic means of contact with aliens would probably include vast godlike machines like Tet from the 2013 film Oblivion. Does this idea seem necessarily more accurate, or do you think it stems from the current AI craze seeping into popular culture? Well, ideas like that were present in science fiction films long before Oblivion. The first Star Trek movie, which, unless I'm mistaken, was filmed in 1979 or something. It had this gigantic, like, godlike space robot, which was called Voyager. And turns out it was like the Voyager probe, but like aliens had met it and like enhanced it. They rebuilt him, but stronger, you know. So it comes back to the world. So this idea existed for a long time, even in like 2001, the Space Odyssey, the giant monoliths. They're meant to be like subtle robots that influence. Basically, they kind of like make animals become sentient and influence the development of species. So this idea was out there for a long time. But of course, with the AI craze, especially in AI art, there's always this preference for these like sweeping artworks where like some giant eye or giant mechanical shit or like some giant pixel crystal prolapsed anus is descending from the sky, and it's like, wow, encounter with an entity. But even if you think realistically, I think that's more realistic than encountering physical beings that boarded a physical ship and flew over there. I mean, like as if they're flying from Oregon to Hawaii or something. But you know, with the scales of the universe, it just doesn't work like that. So I still think it kind of holds, though maybe there would be less like this like pixelated stuff and like less dubstep sound effects, you know. But if something like this really happened, it could be just like a dark cloud of distributed smaller machines floating in the void. So it could be like a swarm of tiny spaceships that's kind of acting like a swarm of birds trying to communicate. And I don't know, if they arrive like that, it may not necessarily be a hostile encounter. Any species who would need physical resources would not be able to cross the space with machines. So that answer kind of filters itself out, I think. So there. Omar Rodriguez says, hello there, CM. Kozman, hope you're having a great day. I'm having a great one, thank you. What's your stance on the supernatural? Do you believe in things beyond the natural world? Or do you lean towards a more skeptical perspective? I believe that everything happens in the real world happens with the rules of the real world. But then, I don't believe, I know that our understanding of the real world is still built on semantic instruments. Logic, deduction, evidence. But there might be aspects of the real world that do not depend on logic and do not depend on repetition, for example. All of our scientific theory is based on like, if you perform a certain action, it can be performed the same way anywhere you are. Laws of physics and shit. But these laws might change in time. There might be places or times in which they may not apply. And this would not be supernatural, like it would not be ghosts or magic or shit. It would just be a part of nature that we have no way to understand, because we're so committed to our evidence and repeatability based approach. So there. And I think human understanding of the world will always remain imperfect. There will always be things in the fringes that science will not be able to assimilate without like breaking its framework entirely. So that's my approach to the supernatural. And a big part of this might involve our understanding of time. And in time, when the time comes to pass on, maybe we are in for some revelations. Who knows? Another bit I'm really like, another bit in which I know that our current understanding is stupid is the whole idea of intelligence and self-awareness. It's very easy to see, even when you're dealing with a worm, even when you have a tiny ant and like you place something in front of it. These are not like machines acting on some genetic code. Okay, they have individuality. Every creature is self-aware. Every creature, if I may dare say so, has a way of knowing itself, has a soul. So like this is very clear. Look, I don't even say I believe. I know, I see it. You feel it in your gut. And they say, oh, what about behavioral science? Well, fucker, if you light a fire in a subway, everybody's gonna run away from the fire like some liquid. Does this mean that people are like Cartesian machines? No. Of course, there are stimuli to which all life forms respond in the same way or similar ways, but it doesn't answer the question of how they feel about themselves. It doesn't even begin to answer this. And this whole areas of behavioral science, I just find it so cruel and rude and barbaric. The way you test animals in lab conditions. Let's put you in a fucking lab, huh? Let's put you in a fucking featureless cage. Shit in a corner. How would you be if you put a human being, even the smartest, most college-educated human being, in the same conditions as a lab rat? They would act like a fucking monkey. Keep them in isolation for a year, then put them together with a woman. They would start screwing like crazy. When you're studying behavior, you're not studying it. You're degrading creatures' souls. And the more I think about it, the more angry I get. Daddy Kozman is so angry. And then Omar Rodriguez says, what are your thoughts on Bleatnik? Well, I did some Googling. Bleatnik is this thing from a game. And I think it looks really cool. I don't know anything else beyond the fact that it looks really cool. And I probably would like to have it as a pet. Kind of a cool goat, pelican, ammonite creature. I like that. If this thing does something unhinged in the game, I don't know, but it looks really cool. Not a bad design either. Though I have a peeve with the way this leg bends backwards. Why didn't you make it look like this? Maybe the entire pelvis is bent backwards like the way it is in some bats, but I don't know. Moving on. Squidlord says, Mr. Kozman, I'm going to ask you some questions. Ask on, my friend. How far along the recording are we, by the way? Okay, not bad, not bad. I got a book called Dirty Stories. It's a collection of South Slavic sex jokes compiled by an Austro-Hungarian folklorist in the late 19th century. Oh, I gotta have this book. Its subject matter is so niche and unique and outrageously cringy. I bet it's one of the oddest books in my library. What's the oddest book in your library? First of all, I would love to read more of this book. I'm going to look it up after this session. The oddest book in my library, I got a few, and I got a huge library, by the way. It's probably this one called The Encyclopedia of Unusual Sex Practices, and I bought this in 1997, if you can believe it. And I was like a horny teenager. I thought, wow, this is going to be a kinky book. But it's actually an extremely dry business-like encyclopedia of like everything you can imagine and then some which you cannot. But it's not written in this scandalous or like ironic way, you know. Like, you wouldn't believe what they did. Like, none of that. So in that way, I really like and respect this book. I also have these two books, which are like these amazing art books. These like useless Japanese inventions, stuff like little mops you can attach to your cat's foot, or this thing which works like a tiara and like does your hair in one go. Basically, this was an art project, by the way, by this great artist named Kenji Kawakami, poking fun at the routines Japanese people have in their lives, in city life. But somewhere along the way, this Western publishers picked up this book, and they really made it seem, even in these books, they really made it seem as if these were like actual products in Japan. But no, they're actually like art projects. But they're just so like realistically thought out and nice that I really like this. And these two are like amazing books. Then you got the really interesting volumes. Now, there's this guy named William Corliss who spent all of his life looking through scientific publications and documenting every sort of weird phenomenon out there. I have two of his books called Nature's Greatest Mysteries. One of them is about nature's greatest mysteries, unusual natural phenomena, and it's got all these weird bolt lightning, unexplicable flashes in the sky, rotating funnels of light underwater, and these are all sourced from scientific publications. So no fringe stuff. And then he's got a huge encyclopedia about biological mysteries, which is one of my most valued and precious books. And actually, if you're into this kind of stuff, just look up William Corliss' life. He died in 2011. And he has dozens and dozens of books like this. Basically, if you go to a second-hand bookshop, buy everything by this guy. They're going out of print and they're really well made. Arthur Clarke once said, Corliss selected material almost exhaustively from scientific journals, so it has already been subjected to a filtering process. There's so much that's quite baffling in some of these reports, and like these books, they're just such a joy to read. Like, it feels like you're eating an infinite bowl of sushi that never grows stale. It's lovely. And I think these are the weirdest and some of the most precious books in my library. William Corliss, look his works up and buy them. You'll read them later and you'll thank me for it. And then I got some ridiculous paperbacks. Like, I found this in a second-hand bookshop in the Turkish capital of Ankara. I still have to read this one. This one about devil's coach horse. So these beetles, like, terrorizing the world. Winged terror which flies by night, feeding on death and destruction. This was so out there, I just had to get this book. I still have to read it. So one of the weirdest books in my library. Daniel D asks, have you read War with the News by Karel Capek? Same author as RUR, where he proposed robots. I have this book. I haven't read it, but apparently it's like written like a real news broadcast, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. Apparently it also has some quite base things to say about workers' rights and the state of the world under industrialization. And I think in the end, the newts kind of win and subjugate humans because they end up doing so much of the manual work. This, by the way, one of the chief works of alternative history by Harry Turtledove is the series called The World War Novels, in which a race of newt-like, lizard-like aliens arrive at the world during the Second World War, but they have like 20th century level technology, and they got a lot of weird war action scenes where like these jet fighters are flying among Second World War bombers, and lots of weird stuff like Nazis and the Allies collaborating against the lizard invaders. Lots of interesting stuff. So I think the lizards there are a direct hat tip to the newts in Karel Capek's awesome work. Really looking forward to reading this, by the way. So also really recommend this to you, all of you as well. And thank you, Daniel. More questions now from Ellie Brooks, a long-time commenter in recent podcasts. What's your favorite thing about living in Turkey? What's your least favorite thing about living in Turkey? Oh boy, Ellie, you sure know how to ask him. My favorite thing is almost everything, and the fact that you don't need to plan your life to a soul-crushing degree as much as you do in the West. You can just go out in the street, walk around, meet with people, have food, just have a nice day, and it really helps people unwind. When you live such a lifestyle, also this is not particular to Turkey, like Italy is like this, parts of Spain are like this. Heck, before these like awful wars, a lot of the Middle East was like this too. You basically can have an unplanned life and still have a dignified, unhurried life. I like that. Also the food, I think it's like one of the best cuisines in the world out there. I would just say it ranks up there with Japanese and Italian, and then Turkish, Japanese and Italian. Those are like the top three cuisines. Greek cuisine, I see it as an extension of Turkish cuisine, although they are better with seafood, I have to admit. And then French cuisine, it's just butter. I also am a big fan of like processed foods in German and British and American cuisine. I love, for example, like a big burger, but not one of those fancy ass, like expensive burgers, but like a genuine like chain Wendy's burger, or a McDonald's burger, or a Culver's burger in the States. Anyways, let's go back to the good things about living in Turkey. Another good thing about living in Turkey is that there's so much diversity here in terms of nature and culture. You could just go, in a random street and see 1,000-year ruins. And it's like you're living in a sort of Lovecraftian land. And that's just precious. And these ruins are not like fenced off and like cleaned and refurbished as some bullshit like tourist attraction. Like you see this 1,000-year-old cistern, and next to it is a TV repair shop. You can sit in the TV repair shop, talk shop with the guy, and the wall you're leaning your chair against is the 1,000-year-old wall of the cistern. So I love that about Turkey. My least favorite part about living in Turkey, now I have to pick my words carefully here. My least favorite part is the stupid, disgusting, vile, cargo cult appreciation of quote-unquote Western life that these educated, secular people have in Turkey. I think they're some of the vilest people out there in the world. They hate themselves without knowing why. They hate their own country. They hate their own culture without knowing why. They're trapped in this rat race of like, they see this world in tiers, okay? So if you're like living in Turkey, to these fucked up people, you're bad. Because why? I guess, I don't know, some shops are dirty and I don't know, some people are traditional, I guess. So if you live in Berlin, you're better off than living in Turkey. If you're living in a small city in Turkey, you're worse off than living in the big city in Turkey. For them, it's just this fucked up, disgusting, one-way chain of succession. If you're living in Berlin, you're worse off than in London, but better off than living in Albania, I guess. God damn. These people will never be happy. They will die unhappy. And unfortunately, they occupy all the best places. Like, they have some strong decision-making power. It's just so stupid. They're some of the most soulless people out there. You know, I would rather have like a genuine, totally ignorant, reactionary person from Afghanistan or Pakistan, or a totally satanically driven, you know, American psychotype. But not these guys. They hate themselves. They hate their country. Like you play a traditional song next to them and they're like, oh, why are you playing these uncool tunes? Why? Have you ever thought about this? God damn. Anyways, I try to put as much space between myself and them as possible. And, you know, let's keep the old adage. In this channel, we have no access to grind, but only my thoughts to polish. But about these, like, upper middle class, barely educated idiots. Of course, they all go to college, but they can't string two words in English together if their lives fucking depended on it. They always have to read like the latest books, but in Turkish translation. They're as stupid as bricks too. Goddamn. Okay, I will be sharpening all sorts of impediments. So let's skip this question. Any chance, Ellie asks, the Gravitals in All Tomorrows are inspired by the Sentinels of the Tall Man character from Phantasm? Well, Ellie, I have to like congratulate you on your awesome taste in movies, by the way. Phantasm is this really weird, bizarre art house horror film. Basically, it's like difficult to classify. They're like ghosts, but there's also this like futuristic maze thing. And this guy is the tall man, and he has these balls. He throws them at people, and they fly about and like stab people, which are really weird. Unfortunately, the Gravitals in All Tomorrows are not inspired by these things. I saw this movie a couple of years ago, actually, so I did not know about what an awesome film Phantasm on its sequels were when I first made All Tomorrows. But yeah, if you really want a good, fun horror movie to watch, always get these things. Phantasm and Phantasm 2. Okay, let's go. Kane Collins asks, what keeps you going in life? What inspires you to continue to create? Okay, this is like a tough question. Because, yeah, I have, like you all, I have big challenges, big difficulties, frustrations. I have a lot of, like, dark times. I have had a lot of dark times in life. And what inspires me to continue to create? When I was younger, and luckier. I was like, yeah, this is my real deal. But now it feels like music to keep me going. I always know that life is bittersweet at best, but I think it's a better sense of bittersweetness when you're creating things on the side rather than not creating things. I also know that even if things come like sometimes when I had really tough times, family shit, life shit, work shit, I just draw and paint without thinking. And I say, well, even if I'm in a jail or something, I could do this. And even if I'm in a bed in a coma, okay, I would not like to be in that situation, but I could still dream. And that's enough. That's enough to keep me going. I owe it to myself. And it would be better if I could share these dreams and ideas with people, of course. But ultimately, it ends in your little skull, in my little skull. The ability to think, to create, to conjure stuff, that's just the best. And if life gets you down, always remember, even Daddy Kozman has some tough times, but he's just too good at hiding it from you. And yeah, also misery loves company. Everybody has tough times. And in this day and age, the boomer generations hoard almost 90% of the world's wealth. No one can afford a car, let alone a house. You just work like slaves. It's just awful. And even in this day, if you feel bad, it means you're human. Because nobody's having a good time in this day and age. We're just that unlucky, huh? What's your favorite piece, says Kane Collins? I don't know, there are too many. I can't choose. Kane Collins says, if by some weird cosmic intervention you had a project besides All Tomorrow's blow up as large as it did, what piece would you have rather blow up? I think it would be my surreal paintings, because if they were admired and cherished by tens of millions of people, then I could have lots of buyers for my surreal paintings, and financially that would be good for me. I could be like a household artist name like Miro or Max Ernst or Picasso or Dali. I would love that. So there, thanks Kane. And then it's Amanda with amazing questions. If you could change one plot element of a movie, book or other media that you like, what would it be? Okay, good question. I don't know. I like many films and many movies and many books. I would maybe cancel some seasons of some TV series. Like these days I'm giving a rewatch to True Blood, which was this vampires in our midst kind of thing that was really popular in the early 2010s. Basically, it's set in the American South during the Obama era, and there's lots of civil rights things intermeshing with basically there have been vampires in this universe living among people, but then somebody invents artificial blood, so now vampires can come out, and it's got all these allusions about race issues and gender issues and LGBTQ issues. The problem with True Blood is that after 2 seasons, it turns into vampire sex, fairy, werewolf sex, orgy sex, kind of barely disguised fantasies. Whereas it could have gone to a lot of weird and extraordinary places if it kept more real life, So that's one thing I would change. Question 2. Do you have an interest in synthetic life or artificial life using computer simulations? I actually was a huge fan of these, and boy do I have pictures to show you. Do you think these artificial life programs could portray different creatures bioengineered by humans? Okay, so let me show you the artificial life games I've enjoyed. And remember, I was born in the year of the Lord, 1984. So in my day and age, the games were weirder, but one of my favorites was this game called Elfish, which was a Russian-made, procedurally generated fish creation and aquarium animation program. Basically, you had this fish, and you could just catch them from this map, and they would just arrive randomly developed No two fish in this game would be alike, and I loved it about this game. You could also breed them, and there's a breeding corner here, and have them swap genes. You could also mutate them, so you could get some really extraordinary fish. Then you could animate these fish and put them in a fish tank, and they would like swim about. I really love this game. I spent like nearly 2 years playing nothing else but this game. I love games like this where there's no goal, but you're just creating things for the sake of creation. I mean, goals kind of suck in life too, huh? Anyways, this was a big favorite, and this game had a lot to teach in terms of artificial life and animation. Like if you, for example, selected this fish and mutate it, but keep the mutation slider low, then you could get a lot of fish that are kind of similar with the same color or same proportions maybe. And it really taught me how evolution works. So I love this game. Elfish, I think you could still find the abandonware versions of this game and play it. Then there was Sim Life, which was amazing. Basically, you made these hybrid creatures and you unleashed them on a map of the world, and they all walked around, and the creatures would be represented by this little pixel image. And I spent hours making pixel art for these creatures. The actual mix and match bit was about what the animals ate and where it lived and how much kids it had. So you basically varied its like characteristics, and in the map in real time you could see them competing or mutating or speciating, and that was really a nice game. I would still play this game if it like appeared in front of me now. And then there was, well, before he was a kind of like a racist adjacent blood and soil asshole, Richard Dawkins was, okay, let's not be that harsh on him. He has some very cringe takes on gender, I will not deny that, but this guy really has some solid contributions to our understanding of evolution. And one of the games he had there was called Biomorph, in which was just like a series of forking shapes, and you could change them. You select one and you get varieties, and you could evolve them into all sorts of weird and wonderful shapes. And I played this game like there was no tomorrow. There are many like alternative versions of it, so you could still like play Biomorph live and you could play this game. I really recommend this. There's no goal, then there's no selection agent, but your sense of aesthetics, which I thought was really cool. And even to this day, I could use these shapes as like basis for like creating speculative evolution critters. So that's nice. Then there was my favorite, Primordial Life. So this game really united everything. You had these like stick figure shapes, and you also had asymmetric versions, and they all had DNAs. So the dark blue ones were like shields, the green ones were used for photosynthesis, the red sticks, if they hit a creature, that creature would break apart, and you could really like let them loose in a terrarium like this, and you come back in half an hour and they would visually evolve into different varieties. And no two reruns of this game was the same, and they had this like real life physics engine. It was in 2 dimensions, but you could see how, like, for example, if there were like slim worm-like animals with one red segment on them, they could like probe their way into these gardens of these wheel-like plant creatures, and in turn the plant creatures could evolve like more shields to bounce back this is wonderful game. I think you could still find a port of it called Biogenesis. I really recommend it. It was just like this gardens, and you could change like the settings. So if you had a really high gravity settings, creatures could not really move, so you could have more flower-like things. Although even in the highest gravity, you could have these like wormy things like this. And if you notice, it's just these 2 red segments. So if this red bumps into the green, this eats that. Then there are these like cyan segments, which are these like propulsion segments. So it goes a put, put, put. It beats like a heart, and it like pushes its way into these plants, and as it eats them, it reproduces. So you get swarms of these like asymmetric creatures like this. I love this game so much. Then for a while I played with Fromsticks, which was more like an algorithmic creature generator in 3 dimensions. You basically had genes determining the lengths of the sticks and the muscles and how often they would fire. And if you did things right, and if you let things evolve right, you could have these things swimming like real life tadpoles or like jumping spiders. Nice game. And then I played lots of Spore. This was a more cosmetic game, but I liked the cell stage. And I also liked the animal stage. And I didn't care for the civilization building episodes at all. But these were my experience with artificial life games. To Amanda's second question, I don't think these can simulate real bioengineered creatures. I don't think these games can simulate that many physical details, but they're great fun to learn. They're great fun methods to learn how life works. Especially with the primordial life game, you really see how variety evolves and like how evolution is an arms race. There's a game, I don't remember the name, but you can also do this in 3D now, where like the 3-dimensional shapes of the creatures actually impact their finesse in life. Because I'm an older guy, I haven't played that game, but maybe one day I will. Okay, then 2 more questions by Amanda. Do you believe that your life would happen roughly the same or drastically different if you had been born as the opposite sex? Well, I actually have a way to test this. I have a sister who's 17 years younger than me, and her character is like scarily similar to mine. And I could kind of get a picture of how things could have been different. For example, it turns out my parents always wanted a daughter for some reason. But then there was me and my brother. Then my sister came along. So like, my parents dote on my sister a lot. And I think for her that's good. But they also helicopter parent her a lot. And they sometimes solve problems for her before she has a chance of tackling them herself. So I don't know, this comes with all the usual advantages, the silver spoon thing, but also the disadvantages. I don't know. I mean, growing up as a teenager, I was a pretty horny teen. But I guess guys and girls, everybody's horny all the time. And it's just culture and learn things that force us to modulate this horniness. That's all. I don't know. I don't know how my love life would have progressed. Would I have had a kid? I am reluctant to comment on whether being a biological male makes you... Okay, so when you're this is from my experience, so if you disagree, you disagree. I won't argue with you. But a lot of the creative skills I developed, I know subconsciously that I kind of developed them in order to impress girls or impress people in general. And at least in the early stages, a lot of this was spurred on by horniness. Now, if I was born a girl, and I look at my figure, I'm still like kind of lean, I got a nice butt and stuff like that. So if that was a girl, and I kind of won the evolutionary lottery, maybe I would not have that much incentive to focus on art, because people would be socially attracted to me anyways. So I don't know. Tough question. But thanks for asking these insightful questions, Amanda. Number 4, if you could spend 1 week in the deep ocean or 1 week in space without having to worry about safety, etc., so I would not be crushed to a pulp like that asshole billionaire and that asshole sub-operator near the wreck of Titanic, which one would you choose? The answer is very simple. I would explore the deep sea. There are all sorts of animals there, creatures, microscopic things, plankton. I'm certain there are like unknown species of beaked whales lurking in the world's oceans. So I would rather see them. Whereas if you go to space, like this is a shot from the Voyager spacecraft. And it's the Voyager spacecraft's vision of the sun, and somehow Earth and Venus are here. Remember that film Alien? And there was this like, this whining sound that was used to represent the vast hostile emptiness of space. As the great American philosopher Marilyn Manson once said, "In space, the stars are no nearer." So fuck space. We did not evolve. It's just a boring, bland, dark piece of shit. Like maybe looking at like the storms in Jupiter could be interesting, but why bother with that? I would rather look at these animals. I would see other entities. In my heart of hearts, in my spirit, I know one of the points of life is to encounter, appreciate, and get in touch with other life forms. And the best place to do that right now is on Earth. So I'm on Team Ocean all the way. Fuck space travel, and I don't know, it's just boring. It's not even dangerous, it's just boring. You'll never get anywhere. Anyways, then we close off with another question from my good friend Jakub Bobrovics. How do you approach aging? I'm in my late 20s now. I know I'm still young, but aging has been on my mind. I don't feel invincible like I did at 20. Time seems to be passing faster and faster. How do you deal? So my friend, I really feel you, okay? In my early 20s, I was about like, I was kind of an asshole too, but like jumping from one sex misadventure to another, breaking lots of hearts and getting my heart broken a lot of times too. But I was like an irresponsible asshole. I was like, I'll draw my creatures and nothing can hurt me. Of course, it's easy to say when you have a home to crawl back to, where you're not paying the rent. Now, after 25 years, I suddenly had started having these like anxieties and fears. One of my close friends died because of cancer. Another close friend had brain tumors, and these are rare, but statistically they crop up. Also, in those years, we had lots of deaths in the family too. Like there was a big earthquake. My grandmother died in it. Awful stuff. My uncle died because of throat cancer. Awful stuff. So I had lots of anxieties. Like I'm gonna get tumors, and like at that time I was living in London studying for my MA, and there's something with British food and the tap water there that just kept giving me stomach aches and like gas. So I had this like nearly 4 months of anxiety where I was like, I got a bowel tumor, I must have a brain tumor. I was like always consciously listening to myself. And it wasn't like I was alone either. Like I had like at least 2 long-term relationships, a lot of one-night stands. I don't know why the anxiety was coming at me like that. But then one night in my 25th birthday, I went out with my good friend John Conway. If he's listening, like hats off to you, man. And I was like, man, I feel so down. I'm so concerned. I'm going to get cancer. And he's like, oh, don't worry. In the longer run, you're already dead. We're all dead. Who cares? And this was like one of the top big brother moves John did to me. After that day, this whole anxiety just evaporated. And I realized, if I die, as the great American philosopher Fred Durst said, I'll just cruise. If I lose, I'll figure it out. And after that, I also faced a lot of hardships, tribulations, even harder actually, because then I was like propelled into adult life, pay rent on my own, shit like this, work stuff, family stuff, love stuff, all sorts of everybody gets these. But in my heart of hearts, I was like, okay, fuck it. If I lose, I'll figure it out. And I think one of the key tricks to undoing this is to realize that there's no losing condition. Like, so what if you lose so what? Life is a generative adventure. And also art and creation also helps. Like if you can do those things, you can afford to lose a lot of things. I'm not saying it won't hurt. Like I'm sounding all high and mighty, but if tomorrow says, and they say like, okay, we're burning your library, or we're destroying your hard drives full of unreleased stories and all tomorrow's chapters, I would be awful. Like I would fight to keep those. But if I lose, I'll realize, okay, in some ways, I think it's related to this Oriental sense of fate. Okay, there are some things you can't change and control. It makes you. It's such like. It's a better hit than all antidepressants combined. And yeah, you're already dead. I'm already dead. But right now you're listening to CM Kozeman's special. I will also explain the sentiment with a couple of memes. In this film, Kingdom of Heaven, Salahuddin, played by this great Syrian actor Hassan Masood, conquers Jerusalem, and the guy defending Jerusalem asks him, "What was Jerusalem worth to you?" And he says, "Nothing." And then he walks back a few steps and he says, turns back again and says, "Everything." This is how art and creation feels to me. On one hand, it's like a silly thing, like you're doodling creatures on the side. It's nothing. But then, when you take the sum of your life, everything. Then another meme I turn to in hard times is this thing from Princess Mononoke. I know it's kind of cringe referring to movies for life advice, but maybe it's no less cringe than referring to books or even holy books. Because ultimately these are ideas that people created with hopes that they would be relevant for life. And in this one amazing Studio Ghibli animation, Princess Mononoke, there are these lepers and they say life is suffering, it's hard, the world is cursed, but you still find reasons to keep living. And I hope this brought a smile on your face. Thanks for watching. I will find more reasons to keep living if you donate to me on patreon.com. So there's the advice. If you donate, you can ask questions for the next round of amazing illustrated questions. So there's that. Thank you and have a nice day. Goodbye.